Welcome back, YouTube fans.
And Apple Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio fans. It is TCM Pod here. Spencer Mathis, Chris Mathis, and a special guest in studio, and Jack Mathis hanging out there too. If you guys are watching on YouTube and or on Spotify, I'm right here at the iHeartRadio studio in Tampa Bay, 95.3 WDAE. Spencer back home and the Mathis household as we'll talk all things about Michael Penix, his pro day, the incredible numbers he put there, which kind of reminds me a little bit, just in the sense of the draft stock rising, of a guy named Anthony Richardson last year going to the Indianapolis Colts. Now, I don't think Penix is going to climb that high on draft boards, but he might very well be a first-round overall draft pick. And then in addition to that, we'll also talk about the Buccaneers adding a pass rusher with outside linebacker Randy Gregory to the mix. Does that change the Buccaneers draft perspective, the position that they're interested in drafting, where they might go in the first round at pick number 26, all those things, and some Major League Baseball too with the Oakland Athletics, Spence. And they're switching over where they're playing. I know we'll have more on that here. You're going to bring that story in just a few moments. But Michael Penix Jr., Spence, first and foremost, what do you think about this quarterback prospect out of Washington? A guy we saw last year dominate. Of course, he did get banged up later in the year, but a guy who really was a fun player to watch out for and a Tampa Bay native.
Yeah, I like Michael Penix a lot. I mean, he was very good for Washington. Got him to a national championship. I think, obviously, in the big moments, he was not as good. He's a guy that can be completely like the most accurate quarterback in all of college football. And then he's a guy that can play kind of like how he did against Michigan's defense in the national championship. The pressure got to him, I think, in that game, but I think he's a very good quarterback. Do I think he's a day one quarterback whenever we look after we get past the draft at the end of April? I don't think so. I think he's going to be round 2, round 3 quarterback. And I think Bo Nix should be drafted behind him, but I do like Michael Penix as a prospect. And as long as he's picked after the 22nd pick of the draft, whoever made the playoffs last season, if they get him on their team and he's not meant to be the starter right away, I think the guy's going to be very good. And he could end up being one of the most successful quarterbacks in this draft. I think there's, as T-Crass put it on your show, 6 first round quarterbacks that are going to be selected this year. I wouldn't go as far to say 6. Of course, you like the top 4, but I think Bo Nix and Michael Penix are the odd man out. But like you said, we were talking about this last year, probably around this exact same time, Anthony Richardson. And Penix has had a better college career than Anthony Richardson. Again, he's not the freak athlete that he is. His injury problems, I think, are a big turnoff for a lot of the teams that are higher up in the draft. But again, I think Penix would be a great day 2 selection or a great pick for, let's say, a team 26 and above to pick as a guy that could be the successor of their current quarterback. Or maybe if their quarterback goes down, he could take over for him.
Yeah, and we saw Michael Penix dominate at his pro day, in which his final pass of the day, he threw a deep ball over 75 yards in the air for completion, showing off the arm talent. One thing that was made note was his speed, 4.56 to 4.59, and Penix said that he's a 4.4 guy in his opinion. So some people had 4.46, others had 4.5. That's unofficial, he said. So I'm good. I just showed that I can run. I feel good. And he ran for 92 yards in 13 games in 2022 after his first 4 college seasons, all at Indiana, were cut short by injuries, including a pair of torn ACLs. That's the thing with me. Not only is he a left-handed quarterback, but he's also battled through an injury list. And it's like you go to CVS and go grab a few things, but that receipt is massive because all those discounts, all those cards, all those gift certificates they're trying to throw on, all those deals and discounts they're tacking on at CVS on your receipt. It feels like this. The guy's injury list is pretty stacked. And for a quarterback, that's a big concern because when you talk about the number one ability for any athlete or really any profession, no matter how good or how bad somebody might be at something, if you're not available, it's great because you can be great, but if you're unavailable, it's a matter of, hey, this guy, yeah, he's good. He's great whenever he's able to play, but he's not playing a lot. And for me, that's a big concern. Talking about the Tampa Bay Rays, Brandon Lau, when healthy, he's good, but he doesn't play a lot because he stays hurt. So I don't like that. I wouldn't take a gamble on a guy in Michael Penix Jr. in the first round. I do think that he is a first-round draft pick in this year's draft, but I wouldn't pull the trigger there. Now, if he's mid-second round, late second round, oh my gosh, yeah, I would absolutely take him and sit on that and think, hey, he can sit behind our guy for the first couple of weeks or the first season and then go from there. But Michael Penix Jr., in my opinion, is better than Bo Nix. I don't buy the Bo Nix hype out of Oregon. I just don't think that he's going to make it at this next level, and I think he's going to be the odd man out. You talk about Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. both being the odd men out of the first round. I think Bo Nix is the guy who misses out on the first round here in a couple of weeks, man. The NFL draft is just around the corner.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people aren't mentioning, like you said, the fact that he's a left-handed quarterback. There's not very many left-handed quarterbacks in NFL history, especially not as of recent, that have been very successful. I guess Tua would be the closest to a successful left-handed quarterback, but there's just something about being a left-hander in the NFL that just does not seem to work out, regardless of if you can scramble or not. Obviously, Penix is fast in the 40, but like you said, 93 rushing yards last season for Washington. Is that a lot? Not really. I believe in the NFL,
2022.
Okay, so he's going to have to get off his mark a little bit more in the NFL. Is he really a 4-4 guy or a 4-5 guy on the field? Probably not with pads on. But again, the left-handed quarterback thing is just something that you've got to watch out for. And that's why I believe Penix is not a guy that an NFL team is going to want to pick within the first 24 picks. And I honestly think he's going to end up like Will Levis did last year, probably the first or a top 5 pick of day 2, in my opinion, on Michael Penix Jr. And if he falls past the second round and the Buccaneers are there, he's a Tampa native. He's been around there his whole life. I mean, would not be a bad gamble because Trask is not a guy that the Buccaneers are going to look to retain after this season. So Penix would be a guy that they could look for. The Baker Mayfield contract was a 3-year contract, but they both of these guys, the team and Baker Mayfield, have an out after 2 years. So Penix wouldn't be a bad gamble if you can get him on day number 2, round 3 for the Buccaneers. But I think he'll probably fall within the first 15 picks of day 2. I still don't believe he's a first-round pick. And if Bo Nix goes in the first round, that's going to be super surprising because I feel like we've been talking about Bo Nix in college football for the last 10 years. Obviously, he was only there for 6 years in college football.
Oh, is that it? Just 6?
It's just, I mean, there's some guys at Young Harris College. We have a guy that's going to be 25 years old this upcoming by the end of this season. And he's been there for 7 years. There's a lot of guys that can just, you can, with the COVID eligibility, the injury years, if you've redshirted, you can have up to 7 years as long as you came in during the COVID times or you were a student during COVID. So obviously Bo Nix took advantage of that, waited till he had a really good season, which he did last year, but I still don't believe he's a first-round pick. Neither do you. A lot of guys probably think the same thing, but I'm going to venture to say that Nix and Penix are both going to be day 2 guys.
Yeah, according to PFF, Bo Nix sits at number 33 on their big board ranking. So saying they think he's a second-round pick. They also think Michael Penix sits there at pick 46 in this year's NFL draft. So interesting stuff there. J.J. McCarthy has continued to climb the draft boards, and that's interesting to me as well. I don't know if I buy the hype behind J.J. McCarthy. I just don't think he had enough experience throwing the football down the field against big-time teams as you would like to see. Now, they didn't have to do that at Michigan because they ran the ball so much. That was their identity. But I want a guy who's been able to do it and then proven that he can throw the ball, which he has had some really good throws. But to win games, put the ball in his hand and say, hey, go win me this game. I don't know if I ever saw that. And I'm just saying in the last year or so.
Yeah, and I think that McCarthy's a guy that's going to probably end up like Kenny Pickett with the Steelers. If you venture to go out there and get him with a top 15 pick, I don't think it's going to end well for you. Obviously, you have Harbaugh trying to hype him up, telling other general managers that he should be a top 5 pick in the draft, and that's because Harbaugh sits at number 5. He would probably like to trade out of that. They need a lot of things, and especially wide receivers there with the Chargers. But again, he's really high up there, and I think out of everybody, he's probably this year's Anthony Richardson in terms of climbing the draft boards. Because at the end of the season, I don't think anyone thought he'd be a first-round pick. Right now, he's every single mock draft that I'm looking at, he's a top 15 pick, which I think is incredible. A lot of scouts like him. A lot of GMs like him. Maybe it is a case where in college he didn't get the chance to show off his potential, which could be the case. But again, I'm not high on a lot of these quarterbacks in the draft because as a Bucs fan, we've seen it a couple of times now. If you're a high draft pick in the NFL as a quarterback, your chances of succeeding are not very high. The top quarterbacks are guys like Josh Allen, who wasn't picked high or that high, at least with Buffalo. He had a chance to sit behind Tyrod Taylor. Patrick Mahomes was late first-round picks. So the guys that really succeed are not high first-round picks, and that's because of the team around them.
Yeah, and there's always that one quarterback who falls through and surprises everybody in almost every NFL draft, and that's going to be exciting to watch. But, yeah, once in a blue moon, you'll find a quarterback late in the draft, and he turns out to be great. I'm not talking about Tom Brady, but look at Dak Prescott. He was a 4th-round draft pick. He's been good. He's not one of those guys I'd call an elite quarterback, but he's a really good quarterback. I don't think he'll ever win you a Super Bowl, however, but he was a 4th-round draft pick. So a lot of interesting things around the NFL, and one young quarterback who allegedly gained an asset was a guy in C.J. Stroud there out in Houston, as the Texans traded for wide receiver Stefon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills for a compensatory pick. And I'm not sure I like the trade for the Texans, because at the end of the day, this is a guy who has had some on the field and sideline issues with his quarterback, Josh Allen, a veteran quarterback who's proven himself to be one of the best in the league. Now you throw him in there with a young quarterback who did have a really good year last year, but doesn't quite have that leadership that Josh Allen has just yet because of his lack of experience in the NFL. I don't like this whatsoever for the Houston Texans. Maybe with having a guy in DeMeco Ryans as a former player be his head coach, maybe that gets right to Stefon Diggs a little bit more than Sean McDermott's message did to him. But I think this is a problem for the Houston Texans. I don't think this helps them get better. It should on the field, it should. But at the end of the day, regarding his attitude and his demand for the football, and, oh, yeah, on top of that, his number he's wearing in Houston this year, he's wearing number 1. So everything just stacks up as a me guy, and I don't like it. I don't like that for Houston. I don't like that for a team who is on the come up. I'm not buying into Houston having a better year this year, not only because they have a difficult schedule here in 2024, but because the addition of Stefon Diggs, too.
Yeah, I mean, the Texans only had to trade a second-round pick for a top wide receiver in Stefon Diggs. I think on paper, like you said, it's a good move for the Houston Texans, and I think C.J. Stroud will have a great connection with them. But a lot of targets and a lot of mouths to feed that C.J. Stroud has to keep in check, especially with the addition of Mixon at running back. A couple other wide receivers going to Houston. Obviously, they have the guys from last year's draft that all showed out. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a similar experience to what happened in Buffalo for Stefon Diggs. I think it's going to come down to mentality, and time again, we've seen how Stefon Diggs is during a game whenever he's not getting a lot of targets, and even whenever he is. I think the last time we saw Stefon Diggs on the field was the snow game with Josh Allen. He's just sitting there begging for targets, yelling at Josh Allen. Same thing is going to happen with Stefon Diggs and C.J. Stroud in Houston. A second-round pick isn't a lot to lose, and the Bills, I think it's very telling that the Bills traded away, obviously, a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL for a second-round pick, because you're not going to be able to replace him. But that just shows he's that much of a locker room cancer. And he's not on Antonio Brown's level yet, but who's to say what? This is his 3rd team already. He may end up a Antonio Brown type receiver who is one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL. He's very good. But if you suck in the locker room and if you're a cancer to your team, no one's going to want to keep you around. And I do like what the Houston Texans did, though. They did take away the final 3 years of his deal. So both the player and the coach have an exit after this season, which I think is a smart thing to do for Houston, because they obviously know what they're getting themselves into. Top-tier receiver, but a complete wide receiver diva that we've kind of seen time and time again in the NFL. And I think he's a prototypical guy that you can call a diva wide receiver. Right now, he's probably the highest of the diva wide receivers in the NFL. So it's a gamble. I think it's good for Houston. If it doesn't work out, it's not that big of a risk. Obviously, they're a playoff team next season, especially with this addition. If C.J. Stroud and him can have a good relationship on the field, it's going to be huge for that team in that city, and I think Houston can make a good run. But if Stefon Diggs is kind of like how he was with the Buffalo Bills in the last couple of years, begging for targets, being a locker room cancer, terrible to the media as well, I don't think that he's a good fit there, and we'll see how it ends up. But again, low risk, high reward for the Houston Texans. Crazy, though, in my opinion, that the Bills traded him for a second-round pick. So, I mean, it's very telling if you're looking at the trade, in my opinion, and we'll see if it ends up right with the Houston Texans. I'm not too sure, though. It's definitely a thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But right now, I don't think anyone could tell if this is going to be a good trade for the Houston Texans or not.
Yeah, and again, whenever it comes down to this trade, I think the Bills were more than likely, hey, let's move on from this guy right now while we still have some value for him. And I think Josh Allen had a lot to do with this too. I'm sure Josh Allen was embarrassed by the way Stefon Diggs handled things on the sidelines last year. I would be. I'm potentially a MVP caliber quarterback year in and year out, and I got my best receiver claiming I don't get him the ball enough and crybabying on the sideline. I wouldn't want that, and I think this move shows you that Josh Allen was ready to move on. Now, this also tells me that the Bills will 110% draft a wide receiver in this year's draft. They also lost Gabe Davis this offseason too, so they need a wide receiver. They need a wide receiver badly. Fortunately, they do have a pair of good tight ends there in Buffalo. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they might alter their draft plan here following the signing of outside linebacker Randy Gregory earlier this week. On Wednesday, a guy who's been in the league for, I think, 8-9 years. He's 31 years old. He's a guy that never really panned out to his potential. He had some off-the-field issues. However, a lot of it was marijuana-related. And Mike Florio joined our program, The Drive, at WDAE on Wednesday and said a lot of his stuff that he was involved with would not even be prosecuted like it is or like it was back then in today's game. And he feels like there's still a lot left in the tank for Randy Gregory, who did play a full season last year for the 49ers, I believe. And yeah, he did. He played for the Broncos 4 games, Niners 12 games, finished the year with 3.5 sacks, only 17 total tackles. But he was not even a he was not even a number 2 guy, much less a number 3 guy. So he very little played. He didn't play very much whatsoever. However, this is a guy who could impact this team enough. And maybe this is one of those situations, not saying he'll have 22.5 sacks like Zach Barrett did, but maybe the Buccaneers do find just a guy who's hungry for that opportunity to prove himself, like we saw back in 2019 with Zach Barrett, because that's all he did, and Shaquille Barrett. So I don't know. I like the move. I thought all along, at least for the last couple of weeks, that the Buccaneers would address the center position, the interior offensive line position. In this move, I don't know if it pushes away the pass rush need here in the draft, but it does in the first round, in my opinion. I think the Buccaneers now for sure go interior offensive line. First thoughts here that you saw whenever the Buccaneers did sign Randy Gregory, and what do you think that they'll do in the draft?
Yeah, it's a good depth signing. A lot of young defensive ends and defensive tackles on the Buccaneers, with Kalijah Kancey kind of identifying as both. Like you said, 3.5 sacks last season. I think just over 30 career sacks for Randy Gregory. A lot of off the field issues. Obviously, not terrible charges against him. And 8 years in the league, if he's had so many suspensions, which is what it seems like in my head, I haven't really done any research on Gregory, but I just remember his name coming up in the news a ton with suspensions and stuff early on in his career whenever he was dominant. I think it's a good signing for the Buccaneers. It was $3 million base value, up to $5 million for Randy Gregory. Best case scenario, he's like a Jason Pierre-Paul, because the defense kind of needs another guy to lead. I think right now it's just Levante David leading that defense. Maybe Antoine Winfield as well, but they need somebody on the pass rush unit that can lead that team. Obviously, Vita Vea, very dominant force, not a leader. Kalijah Kancey, a little bit too young to be a leader. I think it's a good move for the Buccaneers, even if he is a rotational piece, kind of like what it seemed like he said in his press conference, where if they asked if he was going to be a starter, he said he hasn't determined that himself yet. So it's going to be up to him if he's going to be a starter on this team, if he wants to put in maximum effort or not. But I think it's a very low risk signing for Randy Gregory. It should end up pretty well for the Buccaneers. If he gets 5 sacks or more, I think that's a great signing. If he at least improves the rest of the pass rush, it's a good signing. There's not much to lose here. It's a good idea for the Buccaneers, and hopefully he'll end up with 20 sacks like Shaquille Barrett did in Tampa Bay in his first season. That'd be a top case scenario. Him or Jason Pierre-Paul's first season in Tampa Bay, where he had 11 sacks.
No doubt about it. Gregory, since 2020 alone, has been suspended several times, 14 games in 2016 and the entire 2017 season and 2019 season. So he's got a lot left in the tank. Dude, yeah. He's missed 2.5 years of football, and then missed 2 games in 2018 and 6 games in 2020. So this guy, I mean, he's probably missed more games than he's played in all reality, or at least more games than he started.
At least 1/4 of the games he's played.
It's crazy. So there is still some there left in the tank. He looked excited to be a Buccaneer in that press conference earlier on Thursday, and he looked the part. He was very well put together in terms of what he was saying, the content he was adding regarding his opportunity here in Tampa Bay, which you love to hear. A lot of guys could just go in there, and especially a guy who hasn't really done anything quite yet.
Chris Baker.
What's up?
Chris Baker, if you can remember him.
Chris Baker. Oh, my. Yeah, dude. Yeah.
The worst fantasy signing in Bucs history.
But, yeah, and Albert Hainsworth was right there with him. Yep. So a lot going there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I like the move. I don't think there's much risk whatsoever, and their reward is much higher than the low risk. And I think it's $3 million with a little bit more incentive to go up to nearly 4 for 1 year. So not mad about that. But Spence, let's talk baseball. Let's talk about the Oakland Athletics. I know you wanted to lead the way on this because I saw something like they're not going to play at their stadium. What is it, next season, the Oakland Coliseum?
Yeah, they're going to be playing in Sacramento from 2025 until at least 2027. The original plan was for the A's to be moved to Vegas with the stadium built in 2026 completed, and the A's were supposed to move all the way to Las Vegas by 2027 season. Right now, it's looking like the Vegas stadium will not be completed until at least 2029. They're going to be at the Sacramento AAA stadium from 2025 to at least 2027. Then they've got to figure out what they want to do from there. I mean, the Oakland A's are the laughing stock of Major League Baseball right now, and they're going to continue to stay there because no one wants to support them. Their owner openly said today in a press conference, he said the new AAA stadium in Oakland, or in Sacramento, I should say, is the best fan experience that there's going to be in any Major League Baseball game, and he cannot wait to see guys like Aaron Judge hit home runs in that stadium. So he's openly rooting for other teams. I think he's obviously the worst owner in baseball. Stu Sternberg is up there as well, but at least he doesn't root against the team that he owns, which is a good sign for the Rays at least. But again, the Oakland A's owner openly wants other players to hit home runs in the Sacramento Stadium. It only holds, I think, 10 to 15,000. I mean, obviously they're still not going to get that maybe unless
14.
It's opening day.
Yeah, 14.
And they're adding a couple thousand seats in the outfield as well in the grass, kind of like the minor league, or not the minor league, but the Children's World Series that they do every single season. It's going to look a lot like that for the Oakland A's. They've got nothing going for them. They sent a guy down after the first series of the year. He was hitting 450 through 4 games, and they sent him down to AAA. He led the league in stolen bases last season, and he's a AAA player right now because the Oakland A's don't want to win. And it's not a thing like in the NFL where, hey, if you don't want to win, next year you can get a #1 draft pick. In the MLB, it doesn't really work that way. And even if it did, I mean, the first overall pick is going to take 2 to 3 years to even get to the major leagues. So the A's are just, I think, openly trying to throw away their franchise, much like what we saw with the Oakland Raiders whenever they were getting ready to move to Las Vegas. And that's kind of what we've seen out of the Oakland A's. I guess if you are associated with Oakland, eventually you get moved to Las Vegas where all your dreams die. I mean, obviously the Raiders got a great stadium out of the ordeal moving from Oakland to Vegas, but I don't think the A's are going to get the same treatment. I don't think they're going to have as good of a fan base as the Oakland Raiders did. The A's haven't been relevant since probably 2008. It's a tough time to be an Oakland A's fan. And the biggest telltale sign of how bad it is to be an Oakland A's fan, if you go on the Athletics Twitter account right now and you look through the last, I'd say 100 posts, they've disabled comments on every single post.
Wow. That's bad. It's a team.
I've never seen that.
It's a team that's supposed to interact with people, their fans, users on social media. That's what they do. They pay people to do that. So either they don't have any more of those people, they can them, or they're just fed up with all the hate.
Yeah, definitely the latter there.
Yeah, I think so too.
But yeah, it's a tough situation, tough time to be an Oakland Athletics fan. It's not going to get any better for you if you're an Athletics fan listening to this, because it's the year 2024. Looks to me like they will be playing in a AAA stadium until at least 2029. At least that's what Jeff Passan tweeted earlier this morning. So it's not looking good for the Athletics. And even if they do get that Vegas stadium built by 2030, are there going to be a lot of fans left over? I'm going to venture to say no. And will they even be the Athletics anymore? Definitely not. I mean, it's just a complete rebranding. There was a thing going around on Twitter the other day where a fan was walking around the stadium and found a pamphlet that said to all the stadium workers, if you see anything that says rooted in Oakland, don't sell it. All the previous jerseys from the last 50 years, whenever the team was at their best, they said to take those down and hide them in the back. I mean, I don't know how you'd be an Athletics fan right now. It's kind of like what we would have done if the Rays would have moved to Canada. I mean, it's even worse than that, in my opinion, because the A's have unrooted their fan base. They've silenced the voices of their fans. They're the worst ran professional sports team in all of America.
Now, speaking of being a fan of Major League Baseball team and, having it bad, it seems like on Twitter you've been upset with Kevin Cash and the job that he's done here to start off the year. Would you say that's the case?
I love Kevin Cash. I do think that he's experimenting, trying to let these starters go a little bit further this year, which not a good idea, because you look at the starting 5 for the Rays, you have 2 good ones. You have Eflin, you have Savali, and then from there on out, I mean, it looks terrible. The 3, 4, 5 starters are terrible for Tampa Bay, and it's going to be a tough season for the Rays, I think, this year, until they can get some of their starters back that played last year. Obviously, the guys that are in rehab right now are getting injured again. It's just Tampa Bay Rays baseball right now. I think Kevin Cash is a great manager, but that game with Eflin on opening day, him keeping him in the 7th inning, I think was just a terrible move. He was already at 90 pitches, and he just said, "Hey, let's not rely on our bullpen this season."
I mean, it was game one, and I know you're flashing back to that World Series appearance a few years ago, and what we saw there, that's still rubbing you wrong. But I don't know. I think the Rays will be okay. They do have an injury with Brandon Lau, a pretty big one. I mean, they're all banged up in all reality, especially that pitching rotation, which is the most frustrating part because the Rays are built on pitching and defense, and their best pitchers are out here to start off the season. Of course, aside from Eflin being the number 1 guy, Aaron Savale, the number 2 guy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad for Kevin Cash because the whole starting 5 rotation is on the IL. They're all going through Tommy John, and our best defender is a sex offender. So it's a tough time to be a Rays manager. It's a tough time to be the Rays owner because you finally pay a guy in Wander Franco. It turns out he likes 14-year-old girls, and that does not fly in America. So it's just a tough time for the Rays right now. And I think there's nothing that Sternberg can really do. There's nothing that Neander can do, definitely, because Sternberg's not funding him with anything. The Rays are in a bad spot. The AL East is only getting tougher. I think that they're going to still somehow squeeze out 80 to 90 wins, maybe sneak into the wild card. And by the end of it, we may have a 2024 wild card banner to hang up come 2025.
Yeah, probably so. I think that's blown out of proportion there. I don't like that. If they're going to do that, just buy one big banner and put the years on there, small.
That's what the Blue Jays just did. They took down all theirs and just put them on one banner.
That's smart. That's smart. I don't know. I don't get it. I thought that the Rays standards would be a little higher than that by now, with the fact that they've been a playoff team for what, 5 consecutive years?
Yep.
So either way, guys, that is another edition of TCM Pod. We appreciate you guys for joining us here. Make sure to comment. Most importantly, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button as well. Share it with your friends. We do appreciate it. At L Savage Spence on Twitter. Check me out at the Chris Mathis on Twitter. And you guys can follow Spencer's distasteful tweets on the Rays and obviously all of his praise for the Buccaneers and vice versa with me, whatever you want to call it. So check us out.
I've done a full rebrand to L Spencer Mathis.
Oh, so it's now L Spencer Mathis.
Yep.
L Spencer Mathis. All right, there you guys go. He made a note. You guys make a note to L Spencer Mathis on social media. Thanks for checking us out.